Hello, I'm Dr. Carmen Imes, Old Testament scholar and professor at Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. Welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we are finishing the final section of Exodus chapter 20. We've been marching through the book of Exodus slowly. Last week we talked about the short narrative conclusion to the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, and now we have a switch in section or a break to a new section that I want to highlight for you. We're going to be reading verses 22 through 25. Yahweh said to Moses, "This is what you must say to the Israelites. You yourselves have seen that I spoke with you from the heavens. You must not make alongside me gods of silver, and gods of gold you must not make for yourselves. An altar of earth you must make for me, and you may sacrifice on it your burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and goats, and your cattle. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and I will bless you. If you make for me an altar of stones, you must not build it of cut stones, because you would wield your sword against it and defile it. You must not ascend on steps upon my altar, since you must not uncover your nakedness upon it." Now, this is the beginning of the section of Exodus known as the Covenant Scroll. And last week, I gave you some orientation to the Covenant Scroll as a whole. These are some absolute prohibitions and commands that kick off this Covenant Scroll, but it's a little different from what follows, because what follows are the mishpatim, or case law, and this is more absolute commands. You might have noticed right off the bat an echo of chapter 19, verses 3 and 4, because this section begins the same way. Yahweh said to Moses, "This is what you must say to the Israelites. You yourselves have seen." That same introduction initiates the divine speech in chapter 19, and that indicates that here we have a new section, a new occasion of divine revelation, and because the two sections match each other, they provide a kind of frame around the Decalogue, or Ten Commandments. This section also anticipates what comes after the Covenant Code, because the Covenant Scroll is then framed by the laws that I just read to you about building of altars, and then chapter 24, right after the Covenant Scroll, depicts the actual building of an altar and the offering of these precise sacrifices. So what is happening here? They're being told not to put any idols in the tabernacle that would compete with Yahweh or stand alongside him. They're also not supposed to have any in their homes. Yahweh is deserving of their exclusive loyalty, so they must direct all their worship to Yahweh. Here, the altar they're building is supposed to be out of earth or dirt, rather than something elaborate made out of bronze or stone. The altar of earth, I think, creates a counterpart to the heavens. Yahweh spoke to them from the heavens, and they're making an altar of earth. So worship is the nexus of heaven and earth. And that when they build an altar of earth, it recognizes that the God of the universe, the God who dwells in the heavens, has desired to make his name known on earth where people live. There's no need to try to harmonize this altar law with the altar that's later described in Exodus that they're supposed to build for the tabernacle. That's an entirely different thing. That altar is made of bronze. It's used for corporate worship. This appears to be something that is familial. Each family or each community can build an altar of earth wherever they live and offer sacrifices to God. This is for ordinary people. It's made out of simple materials, and you can build it in any place. There's no competition with the tabernacle because it's not going to be made out of silver or gold or bronze. It won't be fancy. It won't be decorated. It's not to be, the stones are not to be cut. You're not supposed to build it of cut stones because that would involve wielding a sharp implement on the stones, and that same sharp implement might have been used in war. So that would sort of pollute the altar. There are two types of offerings mentioned, burnt offerings, the olah, as well as peace offerings, the shelem. Now this is not, the burnt offerings are not new. We've seen many burnt offerings before. The patriarchs offer burnt offerings in Genesis. We've even had burnt offerings in the book of Exodus. A burnt offering is an offering of thanksgiving because the entire animal that's being offered is turned to smoke. It's offered up to God entirely as a way of saying thank you. A peace offering has a little bit different vibe to it because it involves horizontal communion. Part of the animal is offered to God and part of the animal is eaten by the worshipers. So it's the occasion for a feast. And it involves that horizontal relationship as well. God says that they're to do this, build these altars of earth in every place where he causes his name to be remembered. This indicates that even our worship is divinely initiated, that God is the one who prompts us to bring him worship. Because they're not supposed to use any sharp implements to make the stones, not only does this separate the altar from any kind of violence, but it also prevents it from being decorated with images. This is going to be a sharp break from Egyptian worship, which is in stone temples that are fully decorated with all sorts of images. They're also not supposed to have steps leading up to their altar. Now that indicates probably that this altar is supposed to be low to the ground. They're not supposed to be building major monuments. Again, the aim is simple and local, that something any family can do. And the effect of not having steps means no one needs to climb on top of it. The average Israelite didn't wear underwear. And so if they had a tunic that was split in the front or split on the side, then going up steps could expose nakedness to those who are gathered there. And God wants to make absolutely sure that Israelite worship had nothing to do with Canaanite worship that involved sexual orgies. So Yahweh is instituting for Israel a non-sexual form of worship. Now, eventually, Ezekiel's altar, the altar that Ezekiel describes in his vision, has steps going up to it. That's a different matter because priests did wear underwear, and so there wouldn't be any exposure if they climbed up steps, but the average Israelite was not to do so. What's the takeaway from this whole passage about altar building? None of us are building an altar. There's not a need for this anymore. But I think we can learn from this because every Israelite was being invited to fellowship with God and with one another, to join with others in worship. And they could do this no matter who they were, no matter how wealthy they were, no matter how poor they were. They were a kingdom of priests, and God was inviting them to have this regular connection with him, even an unmediated worship connection with him. So that's a beautiful way to begin the laws of the covenant scroll. Now, before you go, I have another resource to tell you about from Edward Schnittjer. A few years ago when I was teaching at Prairie College, I used his textbook, The Torah Story, with my students, an apprenticeship on the Pentateuch. It is a fabulous book. Gary is an incredibly perceptive reader of the biblical narrative. And this particular volume is filled with pictures and charts and sidebars and different explanations that students will find really helpful. Now, there's a new edition that's been released since then. So this is the second edition of the Torah Story, improved in many ways, clarified for a new generation of students. And so it's roughly the same length, but he's thoroughly worked through everything to bring it up to date. And the best part about this new edition of the Torah Story is that it comes with a workbook. So I had an opportunity to beta test this workbook with my students at Prairie. And so they worked through these worksheets. There's multiple choice, short answer, charts to fill out, family trees to try to figure out. So this makes the reading of the textbook and of the biblical text more engaging for students, and I highly recommend it. So I hope you check those out. There's also video lectures that go along with the book that you can use in the classroom. So if you are a student, whether that's official or unofficial, someone who's studying the Torah, you're a Torah Tuesday kind of person, and you want to dig in deeper, this is a book you could work through on your own. You don't have to be enrolled in a seminary or a college to benefit from the excellent work in this textbook. It's very readable, beautifully done. If you are a professor teaching a class on the Torah, I would highly recommend you check this out to use with your students. My students thanked me again and again for making them read the book because they enjoyed it so much. All right, that's all for today. Have a great week.